Welcome back to the Real News Network. We're continuing our discussion about the Seattle teacher strike, which just started today, and the overall education reform in Washington state. Last week, in an unprecedented step, the state Supreme Court rules the state's charter schools unconstitutional because they used public funding but not held accountable by the elected school board. Well, we're now joined by two guests. Wayne Au is an associate professor at the School of Educational Studies at the University of Washington, Bothell, and he's actually a plaintiff in this case. And we're also joined by Jesse Hagopian. He's a striking teacher at the Seattle Public Schools. So, Wayne, I wanted to bring you in this conversation. You're a plaintiff in this case against charter schools. It was just ruled on last week. Charter schools are fairly new in Washington. They're only about 3 years old. There's just 9 charter schools in the state serving about 1,200 students. What's your reaction to the ruling? And the charter schools associations have vowed to remain open, even if this means relying on private funding, even though these charter schools were ruled unconstitutional.
Yeah, well, my personal reaction was elation. I mean, I was very active in sort of fighting against the original Initiative 1240, which became the charter school law in Washington state several years ago. And then I was glad to get the opportunity to sign on as a plaintiff in the constitutional lawsuit, or in a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of this charter school law. And then also I was able to provide expert opinion and advice to the law firm that was involved in the case. And so I was, this has been a long struggle. I've invested a lot. I'm very critical of charter schools and what they do to public education and sort of the paradigm that they operate on. And so the ruling itself felt like it was a big victory for me personally, but also a big victory for folks who are fighting against the corporate takeover of public education.
And Jesse, how does this tie into your fight? The public school teachers are on strike right now. They're fighting for more resources, for better pay. How does this fit into the overall battle for public education in Washington?
Oh, this was a huge victory for public education and for teachers, and it gave the striking teachers a boost of confidence that the corporate education reformers can be challenged and can be beaten back. And, the teachers in Seattle are well known for our fight against high-stakes testing. And I think that high-stakes testing in charter schools are two of the biggest components of a corporate reform agenda, because what they would like to do is reduce the intellectual and emotional process of teaching and learning to a single score that they can then use to punish students and close down schools. And then what they do, as we've seen in places like Chicago, is they close down scores of schools, labeling them failing, and then they reopen schools as privatized charter schools, where you have a private board that gets public funding. And it's anti-democratic, and it's destroying public education. And I'm so grateful to Wayne for helping to lead this fight in the struggle to save public schools.
And Wayne, how do you respond to arguments that charter schools are necessary because they have space for innovation, and the public school system is suffering from stagnation? It's marked by lack of progress and racial and socioeconomic inequity.
Yeah, I have a litany of possible responses to that. The first piece, though, is around innovation. I think the arguments around charter schools being innovative are actually mostly they're mostly false. They're not. Charter schools aren't really being innovative. They're premised on the argument that you have some deregulation and flexibility, but what we see happening are these major charter chains, for instance, opening up with rote instruction and large classes, using computers as the main instructional tool, things that aren't really innovative at all, and in fact are very limiting and not necessarily very effective in terms of working with kids. And so the other thing is, in terms of around innovation, is charter schools also one of the ideas of charter schools originally was that, okay, they're going to innovate and then they're going to come up with something good and then they're going to share that either with each other or with the public school systems. And that just isn't happening because they're premised on a market model of competition for students, and no one wants to innovate and then share what they're doing with other schools. And so the other piece I always like to raise around charter schools in particular, though, is that, when you base something on a market model and that is predicated on the idea that that school closings are a common part of how our reform should operate, and that basically if schools don't get the customers, then they're just going to close down because they're quote unquote bad schools, or if they get low test scores. Like, you can see this whole sort of paradigm around charter schools operating around essentially a small business model. And one of the things I pointed out about the charter school ruling here in Washington State is really that's the risk that all of these charter operators took by opening their quote unquote small business like charter schools in Washington State in a context that they knew the ruling hadn't been made yet from the Washington State Supreme Court. And it's sort of, as small businesses, that's the risk they took. And then here they are, they're being shut down by this constitutional ruling. What's unfortunate, though, is I'm pretty sure that those charter operators probably didn't communicate those risks to the students and parents who are going to get caught in the middle of the situation. But in the end, you just have to see that this has become such a major victory against the folks who want to reshape education around sort of market models of competition and make it business-like.
And last question, I know you both have to run. Jesse, back to the picket line. Wayne, I know you have another class to teach in just a few minutes. But Wayne, what about models like Maryland's charter school model, which is considered one of the more progressive in the country? Charters are allowed to unionize, and they fall under the jurisdiction of the school board, which here in Baltimore City is unelected.
Yeah, so personally, I got to say, I'm not familiar with the details around Baltimore or Maryland, and so I don't feel comfortable speaking to that particular situation. But with regards to the unionization issue around charter schools, charter advocates are always quick to say, we allow unionization, but then you look at the actual numbers of unionized charter schools, and you're maybe talking, 5-10% of charter teachers are unionized, because charter schools actually rely on young teachers. They rely on a turnover of a young teaching force in order to sort of make their finances work, and that doesn't really jive well with unions that respect teachers' right to fair wages and due process. So the other thing is this: I would say the bigger piece of this argument is to say that there's folks who have opened a lot of what do they call community-based charters that are maybe more progressive or more radical than these corporate charters. And I feel that there's a lot of people who our public school systems, our big public school systems, clearly, when we look at stuff around, say, for instance, race and economic class, are not meeting the needs of our kids of color, of our working class kids of color, and we need to be dealing with that. And so I see folks opening community-based charters in response to that, and I respect and understand that piece. But what I don't like is that those same community-based charters essentially end up providing cover for the broad-based corporate attack on public education, and I don't see those folks actually speaking out against the broader charter movement and trying to reclaim it in the name of public education. And so it gets very complicated for me around how to sort of sort through the politics of these folks. I recognize those community-based charters, but you have to understand that the charter movement as a whole, no matter how progressive you're going to make your individual charter, is about an attack on public education, an attack on unions, an attack on public schools, and really attack on public anything.
All right. I want to thank you both for joining us.
Thanks so much for having us on.
Thank you.
And thank you, our viewers, for watching The Real News.